Don't trust him. The words were clear, deliberate, and completely impossible. Yet everyone in the observation room heard them at the exact same time. And for a moment, no one moved, no one breathed, as if the air itself had frozen inside the glass-walled lab where Koba, a 450-pound silverback gorilla who had never spoken a single word in over 10 years, was now staring directly at Emily Carter. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten without understanding why, because just seconds earlier, everything had been normal, routine, even, her clipboard in hand, her sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor as she stepped into the enclosure's outer corridor, the faint hum of climate control units maintaining a steady 72 degrees, the quiet reassurance that this was just another volunteer shift at one of the most advanced primate research facilities in the country. But something shifted the moment she crossed that threshold, something subtle yet deeply unsettling. Like walking into a room where a conversation had just stopped, and Koba had noticed her instantly, rising from his usual stillness in the corner, his massive frame unfolding with slow, deliberate precision as he approached the reinforced glass, not with aggression, not with the restless pacing the staff had warned her about, but with purpose, his gaze unwavering, almost focused, and Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around her pen as she glanced back toward the monitoring room where Dr. Richard Hale stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, giving her a short nod as if to say continue. This is fine. This is expected, even though nothing about this felt expected. And then Koba lifted his hand. Not striking, not pounding, just placing it gently against the glass, aligning it with where Emily stood on the other side. And that was when it happened, when his lips parted slightly and the words came out, low but unmistakably human, shaped with intention, not mimicry, not random noise, but language, real language, and Emily's breath caught in her throat as the pen slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft, distant sound that felt miles away. Compared to the pounding in her ears, because this wasn't supposed to be possible, not here, not with him, not with a subject classified as nonverbal for a decade. And yet the room behind her erupted into hushed chaos, voices overlapping, someone whispering, "Did you record that?" While another voice insisted it had to be a glitch, a trick of acoustics, anything but what it sounded like. But Emily didn't turn around. She couldn't, because Koba hadn't looked away for even a second, and there was something in his eyes, something urgent, something almost pleading, that made the words echo louder in her mind with each passing second. Don't trust him, don't trust him, don't trust him, until it stopped being a sentence and started feeling like a warning she didn't understand, but somehow already felt. And when she finally dared to glance back toward the observation room, her eyes met Dr. Hale's again, and this time, his expression wasn't unreadable anymore, because for just a fraction of a second, before he forced a tight, controlled smile, there was something else there, something that made her stomach drop in a way she couldn't explain, as if Koba hadn't just broken the rules of nature, but had just pointed straight at something she was never supposed to see. Emily did not remember bending down to pick up her pen, but somehow it was back in her hand, her fingers trembling just enough to leave faint, uneven marks across the blank line on her clipboard as she tried to steady her breathing, because the room had not returned to normal, not even close. And yet everyone was acting like it should, like this was just another anomaly to log and analyze. Just another data point in a facility built on studying the impossible, but nothing about the way Koba was. Watching her felt like data. It felt personal. And that was what made it worse, because as she forced herself to take a small step closer to the glass, against every instinct telling her to step back, Koba did not react the way she expected. He did not move suddenly, did not make any sound at all. He simply shifted slightly, adjusting his posture so that he was directly aligned with her again, as if the entire world outside of that invisible line between them had ceased to matter. And for a brief second, Emily wondered if she had imagined it. If maybe the words had come from somewhere else, a speaker glitch, a reflection, anything that could be explained. But then Koba's lips moved again, slower this time, almost careful, as if forming the words required effort. And though no sound came out at first, the shape of them was unmistakable, the same phrase, repeated silently, "Do not trust him," and her heart began to pound harder, not because of fear of the animal in front of her, but because of the implication behind those words, because there was only one person in this room that could be him, and she did not want to look back. She did not want to confirm it, but she could feel it anyway. The weight of Dr. Hale's presence behind the glass, the way the staff had gone quieter, their whispers now replaced with a tense, watchful silence, as if they were all waiting to see what she would do next, and that was when Dr. Hale's voice finally cut through the air, calm, controlled, and just a little too quick, telling her to step away from the enclosure, telling her that the session was over, that Koba was exhibiting signs of stress, and that it would be best to resume at another time. But something about the way he said it did not match the situation, because Koba did not look stressed, he looked focused, almost desperate. And when Emily hesitated for just a second too long, Dr. Hale repeated himself, sharper this time. And that was when Koba reacted, not violently, not with force, but with urgency, pressing his hand more firmly against the glass, his eyes widening slightly as he let out a low, strained sound that carried a different kind of weight, not aggression, but insistence. And then finally, with visible effort, the words came again, clearer than before, do not trust him. And this time there was no way to deny it, no way to rationalize it as coincidence, because the entire room heard it, every single person, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything Emily had ever experienced, because in that moment, the impossible was no longer the most unsettling part. The most unsettling part was that Koba was not just speaking, he was trying to tell her something specific, something urgent, and as Emily slowly turned her head, finally meeting Dr. Hale's gaze again, she realized that whatever was happening here was far bigger than a scientific breakthrough, because for the first time since she had arrived, Dr. Hale did not look like the man in control of the situation. He looked like someone who had just lost it. The air in the room shifted in a way Emily could not explain, as if something invisible had just tilted everything slightly off balance. And even though no alarms sounded and no one raised their voice, there was a tension now that had not existed before, a quiet, controlled kind of urgency that made every movement feel watched and every second feel heavier. And Dr. Hale was the first to break it, stepping forward with a calm that felt practiced, not natural, his hands clasped behind his back as he addressed the team in a steady tone, instructing them to log the incident as a vocal anomaly, to secure all recordings, and to restrict further interaction with Koba until a full evaluation could be completed, his words efficient, precise, leaving no room for interpretation. But Emily noticed something else, something small yet impossible to ignore, the way no one questioned him, not a single person, even though what had just happened defied everything they believed about the project. And that silence, that immediate compliance, felt more unsettling than the event itself, because it meant this was not entirely unexpected, or at least not entirely unwelcome. And as two technicians quickly moved to power down the observation feed, Emily took a step back, her mind racing, trying to piece together what she had just witnessed. But the more she thought about it, the less it made sense. Because Koba had not just spoken, he had repeated the same warning, directed at her, specifically. Her, and that detail would not let go. It stayed in her thoughts like a thread she could not stop pulling, and before she realized what she was doing, she spoke, her voice quieter than she intended but sharp enough to cut through the controlled atmosphere, asking Dr. Hale why Koba would say something like that, asking what exactly they had been working on with him. And for the first time since she had arrived, Dr. Hale did not respond immediately. There was a pause, brief but noticeable, and in that pause Emily saw it again. The same flicker of something beneath his composed exterior, something guarded, something calculating, and then it was gone, replaced by a polite, almost reassuring expression as he explained that primates were highly intelligent, capable of mimicry beyond what most people understood, that under certain conditions they could reproduce sounds they had been exposed to, even phrases, especially if reinforced over time, and that what she had heard, while unusual, was not evidence of comprehension, but of conditioning, and his explanation sounded reasonable, structured, something that could be accepted if she wanted it to be. But it did not explain the way Koba had looked at her. It did not explain the timing, or the repetition, or the fact that the words had been directed with intention. And as Emily glanced back toward the enclosure, she saw that Koba had not moved away. He was still there, still watching her, his hand resting lightly against the glass as if waiting. And that was when something else clicked into place, something small but deeply unsettling. Because if this was just mimicry, then where had he learned that phrase? Who had said it first? And why did it sound like a warning, instead of a random echo? And as that question settled in her mind, she realized that Dr. Hale had not answered it, not even indirectly, and more importantly, he had not asked it either, and that absence, that deliberate omission, made everything feel just a little more wrong than it had a minute ago. And as the technicians finished shutting down the monitors and the room began to clear, Emily found herself hesitating again, her instincts pulling her in two different directions, one telling her to follow protocol, to step away and trust the people in charge, and the other, quieter but far more persistent, telling her that something here did not add up, that something had been hidden long before she walked into this room, and that for reasons she still did not understand, Koba had just tried to show her. Emily told herself to walk away, to follow the others as they filed out of the observation room, their footsteps soft but hurried, their voices low and controlled, as if speaking any louder might confirm something they were not ready to face. But her feet did not move, not right away, because Koba had not moved either, and that silent connection between them felt unfinished, like a sentence that had been cut off too soon. And even as Dr. Hale's presence shifted closer behind her, even as she felt the subtle pressure of expectation to leave, she found herself turning back one more time, just for a second, just long enough to see if Koba would react again. And he did, not with sound, not this time, but with something quieter and somehow more deliberate, because instead of looking at her directly, his gaze shifted slightly downward, then to the side, then back to her again, repeating the motion in a slow, controlled pattern that did not feel random. It felt intentional, like he was trying to guide her attention somewhere else. And Emily frowned, her eyes following the direction of his gaze toward the far side of the enclosure where a row of secured cabinets lined the wall, each one labeled, each one locked. Nothing unusual on the surface, but the way Koba kept glancing toward them, then back at her, made her hesitate, because it felt like he was pointing without pointing, telling her to look without speaking. And for a brief moment, she considered stepping closer, just a few feet, just enough to get a better angle. But that was when Dr. Hale spoke again, his voice calm, but firmer now, reminding her that the session was over, that she needed to step away immediately. And this time there was no mistaking the authority behind it, no room for hesitation, and Emily felt it, the subtle shift from suggestion to command, the unspoken line she was not supposed to cross. And something about that only made her more aware of the cabinets Koba had been indicating, because if there was nothing there, then why stop her from looking? And the thought came quickly, almost instinctively, followed by a second thought that was even harder to ignore, that maybe Koba had not been warning her about a person alone, but about something connected to him, something hidden in plain sight. And as she finally stepped back, forcing herself to comply, she noticed that Dr. Hale did not take his eyes off her, not even for a second. His expression composed but watchful in a way that made her feel like she was the one being studied now, not Koba, and that realization settled uncomfortably in her chest as she moved toward the exit, the door sliding open with a soft mechanical sound that felt louder than it should have, because every small detail now carried weight, every glance, every pause, every instruction. And just before she stepped fully out of the room, she looked back one last time, not at Dr. Hale, not at the staff, but at Koba, and he was still there, still by the glass, but his posture had changed, his hand no longer pressed against the surface, his shoulders slightly lowered, and yet his eyes were still fixed on her, steady, certain, and in that moment, without any words, without any sound at all, Emily understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever Koba had tried to tell her, it had not ended, it had only begun, and the fact that Dr. Hale wanted her away from it so quickly only made that feeling stronger, not weaker, because if this was truly nothing, then there would have been no reason to stop her, no reason to rush her out, no reason to avoid the questions she had started to ask. And as the door closed behind her and the quiet hallway stretched out ahead, Emily felt something shift inside her, something subtle but irreversible. Because she was no longer just a volunteer observing a subject. She was now part of something she did not yet understand, something that Koba had seen before she ever walked into that room. And if he had gone to such lengths to reach her, to speak, to warn, then whatever he was trying to reveal was not just important, it was something she was not supposed to discover. The hallway outside felt colder than before, even though the thermostat on the wall still reads 72 degrees, and Emily could not shake the feeling that something had shifted the moment she stepped out of that room, like she had crossed an invisible line without realizing it. And now everything around her looked the same, but felt completely different. And as she walked slowly toward the staff corridor, the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the distant sound of equipment running behind closed doors only made her thoughts louder, replaying every second of what had just happened, the way Koba had spoken, the way he had looked at her, and most of all, the way he had tried to guide her attention toward those cabinets. Because that part did not feel like coincidence, it felt like intention, and the more she thought about it, the harder it became to ignore. Because if Koba was simply repeating something he had heard, then why would he direct her toward something specific, something hidden, something that clearly mattered? And that question stayed with her as she reached the end of the hallway and paused near a glass panel that overlooked part of the facility's inner workspace, where a few technicians were still moving quickly between stations, their voices low, their movements efficient. And for a moment she considered letting it go, telling herself that there had to be a reasonable explanation, that Dr. Hale knew what he was doing, that this was all part of a controlled environment she did not fully understand yet. But then another thought pushed its way forward, quieter but stronger, asking a simple question she could not ignore. If everything was under control, then why did it feel like no one wanted her to look too closely? And that was when she noticed something else, something small but out of place, because one of the technicians was carrying a tablet, and on the screen, just for a second as he passed by, she caught a glimpse of a familiar image, a still frame from inside Koba's enclosure. Paused at the exact moment when his hand was lifted toward the glass, and before she could stop herself, Emily stepped forward and asked him if she could see that footage, her voice calm but her curiosity clear, and the technician hesitated, not long, but long enough to confirm what she already suspected, before giving a polite but firm answer that the footage had been restricted and would be reviewed only by senior staff. And the way he avoided eye contact as he said it made her stomach tighten, because it was not just a refusal, it was a pattern, the same quiet redirection she had felt from Dr. Hale, the same subtle barrier being placed between her and whatever had just happened. And as the technician walked away, Emily stood there for a moment, her thoughts moving faster now, connecting pieces she had not fully seen before. The cabinets Koba had pointed to, the immediate shutdown of the observation feed, the restricted footage, the controlled explanations, and slowly, something began to take shape in her mind. Not a full answer, not yet, but a realization that this was no longer just about understanding what Koba had said. It was about understanding why no one wanted her to understand it. And as that realization settled in, Emily made a decision she had not planned. When she walked into the facility that morning, because she knew she could walk away, she could follow instructions, keep her head down, and forget what she had seen, but the image of Koba's eyes, steady and certain, would not leave her, and neither would the feeling that he had chosen her for a reason. And if that was true, then walking away was no longer an option. And as she turned and quietly made her way toward the restricted access hallway she had only seen from a distance before, the one that led deeper into the facility where the cabinets and secured files were likely kept, she realized that whatever she was about to find, it was something she had not been meant to see, and that was exactly why she needed to see it. The restricted hallway was quieter than the rest of the facility, the kind of silence that did not feel natural but controlled, as if even sound itself had been reduced to a minimum, and Emily slowed her steps without realizing it, her eyes scanning the walls lined with keycard panels and reinforced doors, each one marked with simple numeric codes instead of names, making it impossible to tell what was behind them without access. And that alone made her pulse quicken. Because this was not where volunteers were supposed to be, not even close. But something about the way Koba had looked at those cabinets, the way he had repeated that warning, kept pushing her forward despite the risk, and as she reached the first secured door, she hesitated, glancing back down the hallway to make sure no one was coming, before stepping closer and noticing something she had not expected. The panel beside the door was not completely locked down, the screen dim but still active, as if someone had accessed it recently and had not fully logged out. And for a moment she just stared at it, her mind racing, because this was not a coincidence. Not here, not after everything that had already happened. And slowly, carefully, she reached out and tapped the screen, half expecting it to shut down or trigger some kind of alert, but instead it flickered to life, revealing a list of files, each one labeled with codes and timestamps, clinical and precise, but one label stood out. Immediately, not because it was clear, but because it was different, marked simply as subject transfer log, and Emily felt a chill run through her as she opened it, her eyes scanning the text quickly at first, then slower as the meaning began to settle in. Because this was not about Kobo alone, it was about a series of transfers. Multiple subjects moved between departments over several years, each entry referencing neurological development, vocal pattern replication, cognitive threshold, expansion, terms that sounded scientific but carried an implication she could not ignore. And then she saw something else, something that made her breath catch, because one of the entries included a name she recognized, not Koba, but hers, Emily Carter, listed under a future schedule column, flagged for evaluation, and for a second she thought it had to be a mistake, a duplicate, something pulled from a different database. But the more she looked, the clearer it became. Her name was not there. By accident. It was part of the system, part of the plan, and suddenly Koba's words echoed again in her mind, not just as a warning, but as a confirmation, and that was when a soft sound behind her made her freeze. Not loud, not sudden, just the quiet shift of a door opening somewhere down the hall, and Emily's heart started pounding as she quickly closed the file, her hand hovering over the screen as it dimmed again, her mind racing faster than she could process, because everything had just changed. This was no longer a question of curiosity or suspicion. This was something real, something immediate, something that involved her directly. And as she stepped back from the panel, trying to steady her breathing, one thought cut through everything else, clear and undeniable. Koba had not just been warning her about Dr. Hale. He had been warning her about what was coming next, and now that she had seen it for herself, there was no way to unsee it, no way to pretend this was still just a normal volunteer program. Because whatever this facility was doing, whatever it had planned, she was no longer outside of it. She was already inside, and the fact that Koba had known that before she did made one thing painfully clear: he had been trying to stop it, and now it was up to her to decide what to do with the truth he had risked everything to show her. Emily forced herself to keep walking, even though every instinct was telling her to run, because panic would only make things worse, and right now she needed clarity, not chaos. But the image on that screen would not leave her mind, her name sitting there among cold, clinical entries as if she were just another subject waiting to be processed, and the realization hit her harder with each step she took back into the main corridor, because everything she had believed about this place, about her role in it, had just shifted in a way she could not undo. And yet beneath the fear there was something else building, something stronger, something that felt almost like determination, because Koba had known. Somehow he had known, and he had chosen to warn her, not anyone else, not the staff, not the researchers, her, and that meant something, even if she did not fully understand it yet. And as she reached the intersection leading back toward the observation wing, she slowed again, her mind racing through possibilities, trying to make sense of what she had seen, because if her name was scheduled for evaluation, then this was not a distant plan. It was something already in motion, something that could happen at any time, and the thought of simply waiting, pretending everything was normal, felt impossible now. But neither could she confront Dr. Hale directly, not without more information, not without understanding what exactly they were doing here. And that was when another realization surfaced, one that made her stop completely for a moment, because if Koba had been able to speak, if he had been able to form words with intention, then he was not just aware, he was understanding something, something beyond what the official reports would ever admit, and that meant he might know more, far more, than anything she could find in those files alone. And the idea came quickly after that, almost instinctive, because if there was one place she could find answers that had not been filtered or hidden, it was with him. And even as that thought formed, she felt the risk behind it, the possibility that returning so soon would draw attention, that someone would notice, that Dr. Hale would not allow it. But the alternative was worse, doing nothing, waiting for something she now knew was coming. And as that weight settled in her chest, Emily turned, not toward the exit, not toward safety, but back toward the observation wing, her steps steady now despite the tension building inside her. And as she approached the secured door, leading back into Koba's area, she noticed that the usual staff presence was thinner than before, the hallway quieter, as if the earlier incident had pulled attention elsewhere. And for a moment she hesitated, her hand hovering near the access panel, because once she stepped back in, there would be no pretending this was still routine, no pretending she was just another volunteer following instructions. But then she remembered the way Koba had looked at her, the certainty in his eyes, the urgency behind his words, and slowly, without giving herself time to second-guess it, she pressed her card against the panel and waited as the light flickered from red to green, the soft click of the lock releasing, echoing louder in her ears than it should have. And as the door slid open, revealing the familiar corridor beyond, Emily took a breath and stepped inside, knowing that whatever answers she was about to find, they would not just change what she thought about this place. They would change everything she thought she knew about who was really in control and who had been trying to tell the truth all along. The corridor felt even quieter than before as Emily stepped back inside. The soft hum of the facility, now almost distant compared to the sound of her own breathing, steady but controlled, because every step she took now carried weight. Every second felt like it mattered. And as she moved toward the observation room again, she noticed something that made her slow down immediately. The lights inside were dimmer, not completely off but reduced, as if the area had been temporarily cleared or placed on standby. And that alone told her this was her moment, a narrow window she had not expected but could not afford to waste. And without hesitating further, she pushed the door open and slipped inside, her eyes immediately locking onto the enclosure, searching for Koba. And there he was, exactly where she had left him, standing near the glass, as if he had been waiting. And the moment he saw her, something changed, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else might notice, but enough for her to feel it, because his posture shifted slightly, his head tilting just enough to acknowledge her presence. And in that instant, the tension that had followed her since the hallway returned, stronger than before, because now there were no distractions, no voices, no interruptions, just her and him and the truth that had been building between them. And slowly, carefully, Emily stepped closer to the glass again, her heart pounding but her expression focused, because this time she was not here as a volunteer, she was here for answers. And for a moment neither of them moved, the silence stretching just long enough to make everything feel fragile. And then Koba raised his hand again, pressing it lightly against the glass, mirroring the gesture from before. But this time his eyes did not stay on her face. They shifted, briefly, toward the same direction he had indicated earlier, the cabinets, the hidden files, and then back to her. And Emily understood immediately. He was asking if she had seen it. And without thinking she gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, but enough, because Koba reacted instantly, his expression tightening, not in fear, not in anger, but in something closer to urgency. And then, slowly, carefully, he spoke again, the words coming with effort but clearer than ever before. "You are next." And the impact of those 3 words hit her harder than anything else had so far, because it confirmed everything she had just discovered, everything she had hoped was not true. And for a second she felt the weight of it press down on her, the reality that she was no longer just observing this place. She was part of it, part of something she had not agreed to, something she did not understand. And yet before she could respond, before she could even fully process what he had said, Koba continued, his voice low but steady. "He lies." And this time there was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation, because the meaning was clear, the warning was direct, and Emily's mind raced as she tried to piece it all together. The files, the restricted access, the way Dr. Hale had controlled every interaction, every explanation, and suddenly it all aligned in a way that made her chest tighten. Because this was not just about research, it was about control, about deciding what was revealed and what was hidden. And she had been placed on a path without even knowing it. And as that realization settled in, something else followed, something quieter but just as powerful, because Koba was not just warning her anymore. He was trusting her, trusting that she would understand, that she would act, and that responsibility settled heavily on her as she stood there, her reflection faintly visible in the glass beside his, human and animal, separated by inches but connected by something far deeper. And in that moment, Emily knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, she could not ignore this. She could not walk away, because the truth had already found her, and now it was up to her to decide whether she would face it or become part of the silence that had hidden it for so long. Emily did not speak right away, because there was nothing simple left to say, nothing that could fit into the version of reality she had walked into just hours ago. And as she stood there in front of the glass, staring at Koba, she felt something shift inside her, something deeper than fear, deeper than confusion, something that felt like clarity, because for the first time since this had started, everything made sense in a way she could not ignore. The warning, the files, the silence from the staff, it was all connected. And the only reason she had not seen it before was because she had trusted the wrong person. And slowly, almost without realizing it, she took another step closer to the glass, her voice low but steady as she finally spoke, asking Koba one simple question: why me? And for a moment there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the room and the weight of everything unsaid. And then Koba moved, not abruptly, not urgently, but with a calm that felt deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers as he lifted his hand again, placing it gently against the glass, mirroring her position. And when he spoke this time, the words came slower, softer, but somehow clearer than anything before. You listen. And that answer, simple as it was, hit her harder than she expected, because it was true. She had listened when others dismissed. She had questioned when others followed. And in a place built on control and silence, that made her different. And Koba had seen that from the beginning, had chosen her because of it. And as that realization settled in, Emily felt the fear inside her shift into something else, something stronger, because this was no longer just about her safety. It was about what was being hidden, what was being done behind locked doors and controlled explanations. And if she walked away now, if she chose to ignore what she knew, then she would become part of that silence, part of the system Koba had tried to warn her about, and that was something she could not accept. And as she stood there, looking at him, she made a decision, not out loud, not in a dramatic moment, but quietly, firmly, a decision that would change everything that came next, because she was not going to let this stay hidden. She was not going to pretend she had not seen her name on that list. She was not going to wait for something to happen to her or to anyone else without understanding the truth behind it. And as if sensing that shift in her, Koba's expression softened slightly, the tension in his posture easing just enough to feel like recognition, like he understood that she had made her choice. And for a moment, the distance between them did not feel like a barrier anymore. It felt like a line that had been crossed in a different way, not physically, but in trust. And as